Could I get everyone's attention, please? Thank you for that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started today, everyone. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 2022 Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals Conference here in Greater Sudbury, Ontario. My name is Michael Turpin, and as a member of the Board of Directors, I'll be your MC for the opening session. C'est avec grand plaisir que je vous souhaite la bienvenue à la conférence 2022 de l'Association canadienne des professionnels de la sécurité routière, ici dans le Grand Sudbury, en Ontario. Je m'appelle Michael Turpin et, tant que membre du conseil d'administration, je serai votre maître de cérémonie pour la séance d'ouverture. Pour accéder à l'interprétation française, à l'aide de votre appareil mobile, veuillez télécharger l'application Zoom et l'application Feedloop Go à partir du magasin d'applications, le App Store. Connectez-vous à l'application Feedloop et accédez à la session appropriée. Par exemple, en ce moment, c'est la session plénière numéro 1. Cliquez ensuite sur le lien Zoom dans la zone de clavardage. Cela vous amène à la Zoom. Recherchez et cliquez sur le globe rond en bas de l'écran. Sélectionnez Français. Si vous en avez, veuillez utiliser des écouteurs. As the 31st edition of this conference, this year is a little different. Delegates are joining us both in person and virtually for a hybrid version of the annual conference. It is also our first time in Northern Ontario, and we'd like to thank the people of Greater Sudbury for their warm welcome. We have over 200 delegates joining us from across Canada, the United States, Australia, and many others. These delegates work in the areas of research, legislation, policy development, public health, engineering, enforcement, and of course, many others. Taking a moment, I'd like to thank all of our generous sponsors, without whom this conference wouldn't be possible. I'd also like to give special acknowledgement to our two silver sponsors, CAA Club Group and the City of Greater Sudbury. Thank you for your support. This year's theme is collaborating on the United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety. 2021 to 2030 marks the second decade of action by the World Health Organization and the UN Road Safety Collaboration. As part of this initiative, the UN General Assembly has set out the ambitious target of preventing at least 50% of road safety traffic deaths and injuries by 2030. So to start off our conference, I'd like to introduce Raheem Dilgir, the president of CARSP. Raheem is a level 2 road safety professional with 27 years experience in Canada and internationally. Over the past 10 years, Raheem has operated Transafe Consulting Limited, through which he assists road agencies across Canada in the development, delivery, and evaluation of road safety plans and projects. Raheem is currently the co-chair of the TAC Vision Zero and Safe Systems Subcommittee and president of the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals. Raheem regularly offers workshops on modern approaches to road safety, presents municipal councils and international conferences, and is called upon as an expert witness.
As president of CARSP, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our annual conference. This is always the highlight of our year, and I can tell that this year will be no exception. I'm looking forward to the official welcome from Leader Jeannette of the Sagamok Anishnaabe, but I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, also known as Vancouver, BC. I wish I could be there in person, but a certain little boy decided to enter the world just a few days ago, and my wife and I have had our hands full. I do plan to join in as much of the conference as I can. Thankfully, my employer Transafe Consulting allows me to work from home, so attending the conference might become a family affair. With the unique circumstances that we've been living in, this year's conference was designed to be both an opportunity to get together in person, but also to be as inclusive as possible for those who are not able to travel, and to allow for members of the larger road safety community to join us from around the world. It is a challenge to plan a hybrid conference, but well worth the effort. Canada is a pluralistic nation that values and embraces the diversity of all peoples and viewpoints, and this is one of the events where we get to celebrate that. For those of you here in person, whether you've traveled from within Canada or come in from the United States, a warm welcome to you. It's a pleasure to host you. You will have the chance to network and share those conversations that we've been missing for a long time. And you're in a place where different contexts converge, an urban city within a rural surrounding area featuring industrial lands and numerous lakes. In many respects, Northern Ontario is what Canada is all about. The City of Greater Sudbury has shown a strong commitment to road safety, having implemented several initiatives, including a leading pedestrian interval program, a complete streets policy, an inventory inspection program for rock cuts, and a road network screening program. Hopefully, we'll get to learn more about these activities during the conference, or even see some of them in action as you visit Sudbury during your stay. Those of you who are joining us virtually include colleagues from Australia, Denmark, Jamaica, Switzerland, and the UK. I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. I hope you can feel connected to the in-person speakers and delegates by taking advantage of all the features that are available through our online platform. The theme of this year's conference is Collaborating on the United Nations Decade of Action for Road Safety. As many of you know, the global plan emphasizes the importance of a holistic approach to road safety and calls for the continued implementation of a safe system approach, and that we leverage the co-benefits of other sustainable development goals and take a shared responsibility to achieve this target. The conference aims to build on the momentum from the past decade's success while highlighting the priority areas for this decade. I want to extend a special welcome to our keynote speakers, Dr. Nhan Tran, Head of Safety and Mobility of the World Health Organization, Dr. Marie-Soleil Cloutier, Professor, Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique, and Dr. Nicholas Ward, Director of the Center for Health and Safety Culture at the University of Montana. I'm sure you will enjoy hearing what each of them has to share. I know I will. I'm thrilled that the technical program overall reflects many elements of the safe system approach, from speed management to rural road safety, vulnerable road users, and traffic safety culture. Weaved through the conference is Vision Zero, the new paradigm which is at the core of CARSP's own vision, a statement that no loss of life or serious injury is acceptable in our transportation system. This topic will also be the focus of our symposium on Wednesday, which I hope you've all signed up for. I'm also excited about the CARSP Young Professionals events and the social program, where we can celebrate being back together and supporting our future leaders. Finally, I'd like to recognize and thank the local organizing committee for all their hard work in bringing this hybrid conference to fruition, and in particular those members of the committee who are based in Greater Sudbury. Thank you for hosting us. Once again, have a wonderful conference. Enjoy reconnecting, learning, discovering, and being part of the CARSP community. Welcome back.
Thank you, Raheem. And from all of us at CARSP, we hope you're having a wonderful time with your new little one. Next, I would like to welcome Jeannette McQuabbie. Jeannette is an Anishnaabe Kwe, originally from the community of Sagamok and Anishinaabe. She has lived, worked, and raised her family in the city of Greater Sudbury for the past 42 years. She has been involved in the Indigenous and non-Indigenous community for many years and has sat on various committees and boards of directors. After retiring 9 years ago, she joined the Indigenous-led team at Better Beginnings and Better Futures 3 years ago, where she has had the privilege of sharing the language and the beauty of her culture with her programs and community partners. She especially enjoys sharing stories, songs, and drumming with the children in the early on and schools located throughout the city. She is the proud mother of 4, grandmother of 16, and great-grandmother of 8. She believes that together we can create a better world for our children and future generations.
Ani, Kinawiya. Hello, everyone. Mino wade ekwe dano uswin. Makwando dem Sgamok Nishnabek Donjba. My Anishnaabe name is Kind-Hearted Woman. I am from the Bear Clan, and I am from the Sagmuk Anishinaabe First Nation. I am very happy and honored to have been invited to do the opening for your conference. And I hope they will have fun learning together. And I will be doing the land acknowledgement. We are on the Tikmekshing and Wanapate First Nations territory in the Robinson-Huron Treaty territory. And I wanted to speak a little bit about land acknowledgements. Through my work over the past 3 years here in Sudbury, I have noticed with partnerships that we have in the city, including the city, there is a lot of hesitation, intimidation, people being unsure around land acknowledgements. And I would like to encourage people, the land acknowledgement, like, yes, acknowledge the land and territory that you're on, but maybe speak a little bit about your experience in your words, what you acknowledge the land for. For example, this morning, I was sitting at my bedroom window listening to the birds singing, and the beauty of this land. It reminded me of the beauty of this land and how each of us has a gift to offer to this world. And that's what I was reminded of. And most of us want to be a part of creating a better world for our future generations. And it is my wish that someday we will come to a day where when someone is asked, can you do a land acknowledgement? There'll be others saying, I will. And to be comfortable doing that and expressing your own thoughts around what you are acknowledging the land for, and be comfortable doing that. And yes. So I would like to begin by saying a prayer. and acknowledging our Creator and those grandmothers that sit in our four directions. Chimigwech manda gishgat, migwech manda bimad sewin, migwech gewesiek, beneshiek, bemodejek, bemadegejek, kenage o esak kik, gum tigok, menonem shkekin. Chimigwech option migwech random manda meno. Hip mixkozia, meno wip madzia, manda gishgak. Migwech dabnochi mananik, migwech geuk Anishnaabe, kabayawa, kabayachik. Migwech manda ke, shkak mekwe, migwechin be. Migwech kenagego mampia toin. Wim nop madziang. Thank you, Creator, for this day, for this beautiful day, for this life, this very good life. Thank you for all the gifts that you provide for us, the animals, the birds, the crawlers, the swimmers, the plants, the trees, the medicines. And thank you most of all for our children and for those ancestors that went through so much for us to be here today. Miigwech for everything that you provide for us so that we can have a good life. Miigwech, 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 miigwech. Now, I don't know what I'm going to do with this while I'm singing a song. Can I put this in my pocket? Yeah. Okay. And this is called the Welcome Song. Hey, baby, again. Ah, hey, baby, again. Hey, baby, again. Chimmy Gretch, Garbashayan, Garbashayan. Ah, hey, Garbashayan. Hey, baby, in the gag. Ah, hey, baby, in the gag. Hey, baby, in the gag. Chimmy Gretch, keep a shyek. Keep a shyek. Ah, hey, keep a shyek. Hey, baby, in the gag. Ah, hey, baby, in the gag. Hey, baby, in the gag. Chimmy Gretch, keep a shyek. Keep a shyek. Ah, hey, keep a shyek. Hey, baby, in the gag. Ah, hey, baby, in the gag. Hey, baby, in the gag. Chimmy Gretch, keep a shyek. Keep a shyek. Ah, hey, keep a shyek. Gretch.
Thank you, Jeannette, for your heartfelt opening address. And as a father to two little ones, I can tell you that I've had the wonderful experience of going to early on presentations, not here in Sudbury, back in Ottawa, but it's not something that I had growing up. It's not something that was taught to us or shared with us, and it was largely unknown. So I'm grateful that my children are able to experience different culture, gain different insights, different ideas, and be exposed. So thank you very much. I would now like to ask Dr. Bella Dinzar, who is currently a Senior Advisor of Public Health and Transportation at the Traffic Injury Research Foundation and also represents the FIA Foundation, to introduce our keynote speaker for today.
Thank you, Michael and Elder Jeannette, and thank you to the entire CARSP board, including CARSP President Raheem, CARSP Conference Chairman Brian, and CARSP Executive Director Brenda for your work on this conference, and especially for allowing it to be more accessible in this hybrid format for public health reasons. So good morning, CARSP. It's wonderful to be here today. It's terrific to be with you, whether in person or virtually. And I'm very sorry not to be there in person as I'd intended due to COVID exposure, but I'm delighted to participate in this conference for many reasons. This is not my first CARSP conference, but it is my first as a CARSP official member. It's my first since finishing my term at the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, and it's my first as an advisor to TURF and the FIA Foundation. We had a wonderful start with Michael, Raheem, and Elder Jeannette, and especially with her thoughtful remarks about land acknowledgement, which I think is especially appropriate given our work in road safety. As one of the Anishinaabe Algonquin saying says, "Ankozi," which means tout est relié, or everything is connected. And I think that fits in perfectly with what we will be hearing today from Dr. Nhan Tran and our panelists. So I had the honor of being a keynote speaker several years ago when CARSP was held in Victoria, and it was my first drum circle experience. And now I'm especially honored and pleased to introduce a longtime colleague and friend, Dr. Nhan Tran. I have known Nhan since he was at Johns Hopkins and I was at the FIA Foundation. We were both in the Washington, D.C. area. Dr. Nhan Tran is the World Health Organization Head of Safety and Mobility, and it's a position he's held since 2017, although he's been at WHO since 2011. You can read more about him and his many public health and road safety accomplishments on the CARSP website. But what I think I'd like you to know about him and what's unique and memorable about Nhan is that he's always thinking ahead. He has a broad and really innovative and very encompassing vision about road safety. Perhaps it's because of his public health training, but for whatever reason, he really is the ideal person to lead in the development of the global plan for the Decade of Action for road safety and lead all of us in our efforts worldwide. And today, he is joining us from Geneva to tell us about that plan. So please join me in welcoming Nhan. Welcome.
Merci Bella pour cette amable introduction. Merci de Jeannette et merci CARSP pour l'invitation de participer à ce symposium que je trouve très important et de pouvoir parler un peu sur le Global Plan d'action, un sujet auquel je tiens beaucoup. I will now, just to reiterate, my thanks again for the invitation to all of you to join this conference. And it's a real pleasure to join, even though we are doing this in a hybrid format. I would love to, in the future, be able to join you in person. As Bella said, I'm going to be just sharing some thoughts, some of the thoughts behind the global plan, what it really means, and mostly how we arrived at it. As has already been indicated, I hope at this point that you're all able to see my screen and that it's working. As has already been introduced by our MC for the evening, this global plan was actually developed following the UN resolution that was adopted in 2020. And as a reminder, that resolution actually came about following the 2020 Stockholm conference that was held in Stockholm, Sweden in February, which was probably the last time that most of us actually came together in person in an actual conference with more than 1,500 delegates. And it seems like such a long time ago, but it actually isn't. And so following that Stockholm conference, which was really meant to reflect on the first decade of action, what we learned from the decade of action, and how we want to move forward, the resolution that was adopted in 2020 proclaimed the decade 2021-2030 as a second decade of action. It reiterated a target of reducing deaths and serious injuries by 50% by the year 2030. And with that, it also mandated the WHO, along with the UN Economic Commissions, to lead the development of a global plan to guide member states in the achievement of the 50% target. And of course, the plan is to really call for all countries to act, irrespective of their level of development. And the plan is meant to highlight and inspire countries to develop plans that are adapted to local contexts. But let me start by reflecting a bit on where we started when we were thinking about this global plan. And this is a bit old because it comes from the last global status report that was published in 2018, but the trends have actually not changed so much. You can see here the data globally between 2000 and 2016, and roughly the numbers of deaths have slightly gone up, but the rates of deaths have more or less stayed the same over the last 20 years. And while that's not as bad as what it could be in terms of the rates of death going up, what it has told us is that we actually haven't made enough progress in terms of actually reducing the deaths and actually changing the trend and reversing it so that it's going downwards. And we recognize that we actually had to think differently about what we have been doing over the last 10 years. I often use this slide. It's a book actually by Chuck Klosterman that was published in 2017. And the title of his book is, "But What If We're Wrong?" And really the tagline is actually challenges us to think about the present as if it were the past. So it's challenging us to look at what we're doing now and pretending that 10 years from now, what would we say about ourselves now? What would we say about how we were doing things? And the question was, would we say that we did everything right? Would we say that we were on the right track? Or would we look back and say, perhaps we were wrong? And it's that reflection, and it was that process that really led us to rethink road safety, to sort of rethink the paradigm of road safety that we have been working with. As Bella has said, I started my public health career working at Johns Hopkins University, and my understanding of road safety and my understanding of the science of road safety really was informed strongly by a public health perspective. And of course, we all have seen this photo of Bridget Driscoll, who was one of the first victims of a road traffic crash. She was one of the first recorded deaths that we know of. And of course, at that time in 1896, we thought of road traffic deaths, road traffic injuries as things that were inevitable, that things that happened by chance. And over the years and over time, we started to recognize that in fact, road traffic deaths, road traffic injuries could actually be prevented. And of course, this was informed largely by the work of William Haddon in the United States, but we also started to evolve our public health thinking, and we started to draw from that. Of course, from a public health perspective, we've often looked at this from an infectious disease paradigm, whereby we have a microorganism, a vector, and a host, and environment. And we started to move that to road traffic injury prevention. And we started to describe, for example, energy and the transfer of energy within the context of an environment. And we started to recognize that the vehicles could actually serve as the vector. And our challenge at that point was to really eradicate or to mitigate that transfer of energy so that it would not cause injury and subsequently deaths. And really, this paradigm has really driven a lot of the work that we have done in the last 20 years. And we started to question this. We started to question whether or not this public health paradigm, although it has served us extremely well in preventing infectious disease, we started to question why, if it has been so useful in preventing infectious diseases, why it has not helped us more in preventing road traffic deaths and improving the safety of transport and mobility, so that we would have seen more progress, so that we would have seen a reduction already by 2021. I actually started my career in public health in HIV/AIDS. I started my career working for the US Department of Health and Human Services. And I made this slide actually a few years ago before COVID, but of course, as all of you know, HIV is also a coronavirus. And so the picture here resembles a lot like the coronavirus, but it's actually a depiction of an HIV virus. And when I started my work in HIV, we talked a lot about fighting against HIV and AIDS. It was a fight. And at that time, it was very clear to us what we were fighting against. It was very clear that the objective of our work was to eradicate HIV. It was to really eradicate this enemy, which was clearly defined for us. And I started to wonder whether or not that same narrative applies to the work that we're doing now. So the question that we started to ask ourselves is, what is the enemy that we're fighting against? What is it that we're trying to eradicate? Is it really energy? So we all have seen images like this. This is actually from my country of origin and Bella's as well. I'm from Vietnam originally. And this, of course, is a picture that often gets shared, or images that are similar to this, to make the point that transport in many of these countries is very unsafe, and that many of these people are taking high risks by putting their families on a motorbike. And of course, the natural reaction to us is to say, well, we should prevent the transfer of energy in the event of a crash. So most of us, or at least from my perspective, when I looked at this picture 10 years ago, the thing that I immediately jumped to was to say, where's my Haddon matrix? Where's my safe systems matrix? I can see here we need to make the road better. We need to put helmets on the heads of all of these children so that we can prevent the transfer of energy in the event of a crash, and thereby prevent the injury or the death from occurring. But when I look at this picture now, the question that I have is, what is it that are we really trying to do? And what is the enemy? You know, I often go back to this quote because I think it actually represents a lot of the way that we have worked in road safety over the last 10 years. You know, we've come to this situation with a very specific problem in mind. You know, and that problem is to say, we need to prevent transfer of energy. We need to prevent that energy from being transferred when that crash occurs and when that child falls off of the motorcycle. And I wonder if that is actually the right question. I wonder if that is actually the right problem to be thinking about. You know, when we look at this picture, now I think the problem that I see before me, the question that I would ask now is, why are those people obligated to rely on a motorcycle as their primary mode of transport to begin with? I was in Argentina and Brazil last week, and we had the same question. We were talking about the prevalence of motorcycle injuries, particularly in rural areas. And what became clear is that people were taking motorcycles, and motorcycles were becoming family vehicles because they had no other choice. The expression from mule to motorcycle was shared with me. And it was stated that, in fact, most of these people take the motorcycle because they don't have access to a car, because they're unable to afford a car, and because there's not adequate public transport. So when their child gets sick, they put their child on a motorcycle because that's the only choice that they have. So we look at this picture again, and the question that we should be asking ourselves is, why does that situation exist? And what is the real problem there? Is the problem really that that child with a smile is not protected by a helmet? Or is that the challenge, the problem, really the fact that in these settings, there is inadequate transport options for families such as this? Because I think the question that we ask really determines the actions that we ultimately take to answer that question. We have started to recognize, in fact, that road traffic deaths are not caused by a virus in the same way that we think about HIV or corona. And in fact, we've started to recognize more broadly that deaths and injuries that result from road traffic crashes are a byproduct of transport and mobility. If you're an economist, we would use the term a negative externality of transport. And when we look at it from that perspective, we start to recognize the problem in a very different way. And we actually start to recognize a very different problem altogether. We're no longer talking about the transfer of energy only in isolation. We're talking about the failure of transport systems and mobility. And when we started to recognize that, we also see that there are challenges related to the equity of transport, the safety of transport. And the challenge for us moving forward isn't just to prevent a crash from resulting in death and injury. It's actually about thinking about how do we improve the safety of mobility and transport. In fact, this shift in thinking, this shift in paradigm has in fact informed, and the unit which I lead now is called Safety and Mobility for that reason, whereas we used to be called Unintentional Injury Prevention. Because what we're recognizing more and more is that the way that we have to move forward is to actually rethink how we describe the problem. And that narrative really drives and directs us in terms of how we respond to that problem. So for us, it is really about improving the safety of transport, making it safer, making it more accessible, making it more equitable, but also recognizing that in so doing, we're also improving, if you will, the air quality. We're also improving access to healthier modes of transport. And that is part of the broader development agenda that we have laid out within the United Nations. In achieving this new paradigm, we've started to recognize the importance of actually having a systems thinking approach to how we respond to the challenge of mobility and transport. We all know and talk a lot about safe systems, but we rarely talk about systems thinking. And there is a difference. Often what we talk about when we think about the safe systems is the 5 pillars. And of course, we take full credit for this and responsibility for promoting this. Of course, it was a means of helping deconstructing and making more accessible this complex idea of a safe systems by identifying 5 pillars in terms of talking about road safe, the safe road users, post-crash care. But I think what it has done is it actually created silos of work. And that's what we observed when we reflected on the decade of action 2011 to 2020. And so our challenge moving forward was to actually develop a plan and to actually insert in that plan systems thinking so that we are actually really working towards a safe system and not just working in silos. So what do we really mean by a systems lens? And again, I think many of you probably have seen this. It's the idea that a system underpins what we see. And if we only focus on the events, that is to say, the deaths and injuries, we're actually missing a bigger part of it. And we're, if you will, using a public health comparison, we're really only treating the symptom and not really addressing the underlying disease. And so when we started to think about this and we started to apply this systems lens to road safety, we started to see that really the things that we really needed to be thinking about more and more was looking at the transport systems and policies, but also understanding some of the social, cultural, economic, and political influences that actually influence the way that our transport systems are set up. And really, we've tried to incorporate that. Obviously, this is a slide that I put up a few years ago when we were doing a lot more travel. I had an experience once when I was traveling from Geneva to Tunis, and this is normally a 2-hour flight. And when we got to the airport, we were told that we had a bit of a delay, and they didn't really tell us why. And a few minutes later, they told us that actually we're a bit delayed because some birds flew into the airplane engine. And of course, that caused a delay. And, you know, obviously they said the plane was flyable, but in order to ensure that it was 100% safe, they had to do inspections, they had to clean the engine, et cetera, et cetera. Long story of this is that the flight eventually got delayed. We ended up waiting 5 hours at the airport and then only to find out that it was delayed. And then we had to go back the next day. I missed half of my meetings. When I came back, I had an interesting thought. You know, it occurred to me that even though all of us were extremely annoyed about the event, none of us actually were outraged by it. None of us said, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you are canceling the flight because some birds flew into the engine. All of us accepted without hesitation that safety was, of course, the most important thing when it came to aviation. And it occurred to me that we don't have the same reaction when it comes to land transport. If there were a bus that had low tire pressure and the bus were delayed, I wondered if people would say, okay, that's fine, we need to do whatever it takes so that we are safe. And it occurred to me at that moment that I don't think we value safety when it comes to land transport in the same way that we inherently and unquestionably value it in other things, for example, aviation. So part of our changing mindset was not only to say that we have to have a new way of thinking about road safety, it's also challenging us to embrace safety as a core value of how we think about mobility and transport. And it was based on that reflection that we really set out to develop this new plan. And of course, this plan draws upon much of what we already knew. It draws upon the safe systems principle, of course, that design should be forgiving, but we also recognize the importance of systems that are equitable and responsive to the needs of users and the population. We also wanted to emphasize that safety was a shared responsibility, and that while governments have an important role to play, other actors, and you will hear from the panels, also have an important role in terms of how they contribute, but also how they influence mobility and transport. And finally, we also recognize that mobility and transport are constantly evolving, and that ensuring the safety of these systems is not a one-time event. It doesn't happen through a one-time intervention, but that safety is actually an ongoing process. So you've all seen the plan, and I won't go through all of these elements, but you'll see that we have 5 different elements. And of course, the elements that I would like to talk more about are the sort of the key areas of action. We talk about the importance of multimodal transport and land use planning for the very reason that we wanted to shift the focus from only the 5 pillars to really talking about the system itself, and to really focusing on transport and mobility and how we design systems the access to public transport is a critical part of this, and the infrastructure to ensure different modalities of transport is equally important. And of course, we've included the other areas of work, including the road infrastructure, the vehicles, the roads, as well as the post-crash response, which of course includes rehabilitation management, but also includes a just response for victims. And of course, we added, and this was something that wasn't present in the last plan, we really wanted to highlight the importance of implementation and the fact that it wasn't just about saying what needs to be done. We really wanted to highlight the things that were necessary to ensure that what needs to get done is actually getting done. And of course, you'll see here issues related to financing, capacity development, but you'll also note that we've emphasized the importance, because mobility and transport needs to respond to all users, the importance of engaging with all segments of the population and bringing in, for example, gender perspectives to ensure that we actually achieve the equity dimensions of mobility and transport that we are seeking to really address. I think many of you have seen this picture. It's quite old. I think it's more than 10 years old, but I still use it because I think it's quite powerful. But I don't use it to describe the importance of equity. I use it to really highlight what we really mean when we talk about systems thinking and what we mean by implementing a systems thinking approach. So obviously, when we look at this, we see obviously that that we need to shift the boxes to make it more equitable. And this is what I think the last decade has represented. We've really tried to target interventions to improve vehicle safety, to improve risk behavior, to reduce the risk taking by users, to improve the safety. But we really haven't achieved improvements in the system as a whole. What we've done is we've stopped the bleeding and we've addressed the challenges. But in so doing, we have perpetuated, because when we approach the problem from this perspective, we are implicitly validating that system as being correct. And therefore, we just make slight modifications to that. What we're calling for today, what we're calling for through this global plan is a rethink. It is to say, perhaps the system that we have in place isn't right. Perhaps the systems that we have in place aren't equitable enough, aren't safe enough, and therefore we need to not just intervene to help make them safer. We might need to rethink the systems as a whole. And really, that's what we're calling for. And in so doing, we're recognizing, of course, that these systems are extremely complex. We're recognizing, of course, that these systems are influenced by a myriad of factors. And the challenge we have in front of us today is how to manage that complexity, to understand what we can do to help influence the things that might ultimately influence the types of outcomes we want. How do we, as a community of public health practitioners, how do we, as a community of public health practitioners, address the negative externalities, the byproducts that come from systems that we don't directly control? That is the challenge of road safety in the next 10 years. But I do think that we have very good examples of how this is being addressed. And of course, you see here two very different pictures. But what I wanted to highlight in these pictures is that they are both examples of roads that have adopted a 30-kilometer-per-hour speed limit. And I don't need to explain what is problematic about this picture. And we know, of course, that the designs influence behaviors, and of course, this tells us that we have to approach road safety and mobility from a holistic approach, and that the limitations of what it means when we only approach things from a very sort of narrow and siloed perspective. I did my training actually in Malaysia, and this is actually a picture that came from a headline of a newspaper that was meant to draw attention to the bad behaviors of these motorcyclists that don't want to comply or don't want to use the dedicated motorcycle lane that has been created for them. And of course, when you look at the distribution of vehicles within Malaysia, where half of all motorized transport are motorcyclists, the question that should come to our minds is why, if half of the motorized transports are motorcyclists, is there one lane for them? Why aren't there 2 lanes? Why aren't we allocating half of the road space for them? So I'm not saying this to demonize, but it's to do what we've done, but it's to highlight the inherent biases. Much in the same way, our biases influence how we look at the picture of the 3 boys and we say, oh, we just need to shift the boxes. The biases we have actually influence the way that we interact with the system, but how we approach the design of these systems as well. And of course, we're now actually thinking more about the broader influences and consideration, including, for example, even the influence of oil prices and how that may or may not influence the dominance of private vehicles. We look at safety considerations as well. And the last part of the plan is really highlighting who should do it and who is responsible. And of course, on this point, I just wanted to draw attention to one element and one group that we talk about, but we actually don't talk about enough. Private sector. This slide comes from the CIE fact book from, I think, 2020, if I'm not mistaken, when the slide was produced. And it actually lists the world's largest economic entities. And you'll note that actually Walmart is the world's 10th largest economic entity. That means that the United Nations recognizes 194 member states, and Walmart is bigger economically than the economies of 184 of them. And so when we talk about who influences mobility and transport, who influences what happens in countries, to ignore the influence of the private sector, I think has been a big challenge and an oversight on our part. And it goes beyond calling for the corporate social responsibility or the ESG strategies, the environment, social, and governance strategies. It actually calls upon us to actually look at the way that the private sector in how it operates influences directly and indirectly the safety of transport and mobility. Just to give you some insights in terms of the magnitude, corporate spending on procurement, including transport, the procurement of products, raw materials, delivery, represents about 43% of revenues. And if you look at the fact that the 500 largest companies have about 30 trillion in revenue, that would mean that $13 trillion of that revenue is spent on procurement, including transport. We often talk about how road safety is underfunded. We often talk about how we need several million or maybe several hundred millions more invested in road safety. Ladies and gentlemen, there are $13 trillion being spent on procurement, including transport services, every year. Why haven't we reached out and tried to leverage the social influence of this spending? How can we incentivize corporations and make accountable these entities so that this resource is being used in a way that contributes positively and not negatively to the mobility and transport systems that we have? And there are things that they can do, things that you know and things that we have been advocating for. But of course, the question is, how do we incentivize? How do we hold accountable? And there are things that are happening. We are placing a lot more emphasis on sustainability reports. If we are holding private sector accountable for their environmental impact, why then aren't we holding them accountable for their safety impact? And there are new initiatives. The World Bank and the FIA are trying to pilot what they're calling a safety index as a means of monetizing the value, corporate value of safety and safety practices within an organization. So the point that I would like to leave you with is that there are ways that we're able to address this. What we are calling for is a fundamental shift in the paradigm of how we think about road safety. It is a complex paradigm, but there are ways for us to do that. And we are seeing examples of how that can be done. But it does require us to commit to acting a bit differently. It does force us to engage with actors that we previously have not engaged with, in ways that we have not engaged with. But I look at this as a tremendous opportunity for the global community of road safety practitioners, of public health practitioners, to actually make a tremendous impact in the coming decade. Let me end with this simple reminder that I think has been extremely powerful for me. Of course, this comes from a picture. This is a depiction of what all of us know as the butterfly effect, which was coined by Edward Lorenz, who was actually a mathematician and meteorologist, who had a model that showed, and he hypothesized that actually a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world could eventually lead to a tornado or a storm in another part of the world. So when we think about how complex, how big the problem is, I often remind us that if a butterfly flapping its wing can result in a tornado somewhere else, imagine the impact that we can have as individuals. Our small changes can influence something that will influence something else, that will influence something else, that will ultimately lead to the change. And our collective influence as individuals, as consumers of private goods, and as professionals is tremendous. And I believe that if we commit to this vision today, that in 10 years' time, we will more than achieve the 50% reduction that's being called for in the global plan. That we will, in fact, be able to even achieve the vision of zero deaths. Because ultimately, that is the dream, the vision that we're all working towards for. And it is within our reach, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to be present at this meeting and to share with you the insights and some reflections about how we have arrived at this global plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nhan, for that thought-provoking and really inspiring presentation. With the work you've done to lay the groundwork for action, I think that all of us and countries around the world and some of the speakers and organizations we'll hear from in the next panel will have some of the tools and the new way of thinking that we need to truly take action during the second decade of action. And we look forward to working with you and your colleagues at the World Health Organization to do just that. So please join me in a final round of applause. And thank you very much again, Dr. Nhan Tran. And now I think that there will be a technical break because I believe some of our virtual delegates are unable to access this. So is that correct? Okay.
So everyone, we're just going to take a 10-minute break. We're having a bit of issue with the online feed right now. So if you feel free to walk around, grab some water, go in the hall and get some air. We're going to take about 10 minutes. It's 1:40 right now. So be back around 1:50, please.